Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for November 18th, 2025. Today, let's start at NBCPathway.com for this article that says, John Vaughn lives in South Springfield, near the site where Missouri's third Mormon temple is under construction. He's a great resource on the beliefs and practices of Latter-day Saints and wants to share that information with Missouri Baptists. As the newest member of the Missouri Baptist Apologetics Network, Vaughn has hundreds of files of information he can share with churches as they confront the counterfeit Christian beliefs of the LDS Church. That paragraph perfectly illustrates the theological competition at play, which is what the Missouri Baptist Apologetics Network exists to fuel. However, claiming one's own unprovable theology is superior to another's unprovable theology is a distraction from what truly matters, the impact of the organization's policies on its most vulnerable members. If Mr. Vaughn and the Missouri Baptists are truly motivated by protecting people from harmful beliefs, their focus should not be on the gold plates, but on institutional policies that lead to measurable negative outcomes, such as high rates of unaliving attempts among LGBTQ+ youth, the psychological harm of scrupulosity induced by the worthiness system, and the institutional barriers that subordinate women's authority. Back to the article. First, he says, they do not like to be referred to as Mormons or Latter-day Saints, preferring people say Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But, he adds, I am not going to call them by their full name because it is blasphemous. I am not going to glorify their different Jesus or their branding as Latter-day Saints. Vaughn says the LDS religion preaches a false gospel, and its various levels of beliefs and understandings of heaven and the afterlife are not biblically sound. Vaughn's entire argument hinges on the idea that there is one universal objective standard, biblically sound, to which all Christian claiming faiths must adhere. This premise is logically flawed. The Bible contains numerous contradictions, ambiguities, and different literary genres. If a single biblically sound interpretation existed, there would not be roughly 45,000 distinct Christian denominations worldwide. Vaughn rejects the LDS name because their beliefs are unsound, but their beliefs are only judged unsound because they do not conform to Vaughn's biblically sound standard. The argument is circular and self-affirming. The entire exchange operates in the realm of apologetics, defending one's faith tradition against a rival. The logical response is to dismiss the biblically sound competition as an irrelevant academic exercise and, once again, return to the empirical. Whether a policy is biblically sound is debatable. Whether it causes documented harm to youth is not. Back to the article. He said the new Mormon temple in South Springfield will occupy a place of prominence in the city. Vaughn said Utah-based real estate developers are rumored to be planning for new homes to be built around the temple's site. Many are expected to be purchased by LDS members. This very well could be true, but since the church is not transparent about such matters, proving it would be difficult. The article goes on to say, Missouri is an important geographical location in the LDS world, says Vaughn, because of their belief that after Jesus' return to Jerusalem, he will come to independence as the site of the New Jerusalem. They also believe the Garden of Eden is located just north of Kansas City. Also true, one of Mormonism's more strange, harebrained beliefs. Springfield residents need to be aware of a blitz of LDS missionaries and new Mormon neighbors coming and sharing a false gospel message, he says. The opening of the temple and free tours being offered will be a public relations bonanza for the church. Vaughn is concerned that many will be caught unaware by LDS beliefs. You know, Vaughn is right to worry that people will be caught unaware. They may be caught unaware in the walls of his own church right now. The way to protect them is to give them the right questions to ask, shifting the focus from the celestial to the temporal. When it comes to the Mormon church, though, here are some good questions to ask. How is the church's $100+ billion investment fund governed? And is there any external oversight of its financial decisions? What is the policy regarding children disclosing sensitive personal information during one-on-one interviews with leaders? What is the official policy regarding LGBTQ+ members' ability to marry, hold leadership positions, and partake in temple ordinances? What mechanisms exist to report and investigate misconduct by a local leader, like a bishop or stake president, without having that same leader preside over the investigation? The best thing he could do is not tell the people of Springfield what to believe, but arm them with the tools to critically assess any organization's policies, power structures, and documented impact on vulnerable individuals. Any religious organization that objects to those questions is the one that deserves true scrutiny. Back to the article, he said Mormons have a different God, a different Jesus, a different heaven and hell, a different Bible, plus other sources, and different salvation. He added, eternity is too long to be wrong. Once again, claiming one's own unprovable theology is superior to another's unprovable theology is a distraction from what truly matters, the impact of the organization's policies on its most vulnerable members. The article goes on to say, the basis of Mormon doctrine is derived from 4 books the LDS accepts as scripture: the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, and the King James Version of the Bible as updated by the LDS. In addition, the LDS president may pronounce new revelations that add to the LDS canon. Polygamy, the belief that men may marry multiple wives, was outlawed by the U.S. government and thus prevented Utah from attaining statehood. So the LDS abolished official belief in polygamy in 1890. Vaughn said early LDS presidents Joseph Smith and Brigham Young combined had more than 90 wives, some as young as age 14. Others were already married to other men. Another LDS belief that changed was the requirement that blacks could not be part of the temple ordinances and could not be ordained into the temple priesthood. That is, until the late 1970s when the civil rights movement began to put cultural pressure on the church to conform. These and many other inconsistencies led researchers such as Vaughn to speak out and share the difference between the LDS religion and Orthodox Christianity, as well as other core biblical and cultural issues. Vaughn welcomes pastors to give him an opportunity to speak on these issues. And at the bottom of the article, Derek Van Buskirk responded with this: a lot of context is missing, so I'll throw some in here. Doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints derives from prophets, both living and those recorded in Scripture, the same way God's church has been run since Adam. And then he references Amos chapter 3, verse 7. I think I need to reiterate again. Claiming one's own unprovable theology is superior to another's unprovable theology is a distraction from what truly matters, the impact of the organization's policies on its most vulnerable members. Van Buskirk goes on to say, with that said, we believe in continuing revelation, which clarifies certain positions and adapts to the needs of the saints, as God is not dead and still performs works and miracles. Also, Missouri is important to the saints, as shortly following the restoration of the church, many saints were beaten and forced out of Missouri after a literal extermination order was placed on their heads. In that part of the comment, Derek Van Buskirk, in his attempt to defend the church, cherry-picked the part where the saints were victims, but omitted the context that explains why the conflict occurred. The conflicts in Missouri were triggered not solely by religious hatred, but by the saints' rapid, unified accumulation of land and their efforts to establish a powerful political and economic bloc that directly threatened the security and power structure of the existing frontier settlements. Derek also says, the church doesn't waste its time downplaying other churches. We don't have to. We preach the truth, and honest seekers cling to it. Look, the claim that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doesn't waste its time downplaying other churches is excellent PR, but it is historically inconsistent with its own founding narrative. The entire foundation of the Latter-day Saint movement rests on the premise, rooted in Joseph Smith's first vision, that all existing Christian churches were corrupt or wrong, and that the Church of Jesus Christ had to be restored because the original truth had been lost. Derek finishes by saying, and good luck slowing down the work of God with your hate. Just this month, I met 2 amazing young women who converted. One was Baptist and the other Catholic, after feeling the Holy Spirit testify of Christ to them during an open house tour of the house of the Lord. You can use your hundreds of files, and I've probably read all of them, but in the end, you can't compete with the truth shared by 2 18-year-old missionaries and a book translated by an illiterate farm boy in the 1820s. Here, Derek begins with a classic ad hominem attack. He attempts to discredit Vaughn by questioning his motive, which he declares is hate, rather than engaging with Vaughn's historical or doctrinal critique. Logically, criticism of an organization's policies, even if strongly worded, is not necessarily hate. It is an appeal for transparency and reform. Derek then uses an appeal to emotion to try and prove his point, and personal spiritual experiences, while deeply meaningful to the individual, are entirely subjective and cannot be used as empirical proof of an institutional claim. Every faith Vaughn opposes is built on billions of similar personal spiritual experiences. Personal belief proves nothing about an organization's ethical structure, so the debate over whether two 18-year-old missionaries or a book translated by a farm boy who was maybe not classically educated but certainly was not illiterate hold the absolute truth is precisely the theological distraction the Missouri Baptist Apologetics Network is set up to address, and that the LDS Defender eagerly embraces. However, like I have said twice now, this spiritual competition is an academic distraction. Whether one believes in the Book of Mormon or the New Jerusalem in Missouri is entirely a matter of faith. Whether an organization creates policies that lead to measurable harm or subordinate its members is a matter of verifiable fact that no amount of spiritual testimony can override. Next, we are going to discuss a few clips from a recent video published by Jacob Hansen called My Reaction to the Most Viral Ex-Mormon Video of All Time. I am not actually going to show the parts of the video where Jacob plays clips of Johnny Harris, a YouTube journalist, talking about his faith deconstruction. The link to that will be in the show notes. I am just going to play a few clips of Jacob's responses and, like I love to do, dissect them a little.
So I hear this a lot, people talking about this sort of why it's so difficult to leave. And I think actually the reason it's so difficult to leave is because you're stepping off of something that's solid into something that isn't. And you're trying to figure out, like, what is your worldview now? And the reality is you're not just stepping away from quote unquote Mormonism. You're stepping away from Christianity. You're probably stepping away from theism itself. And when you do that, there are massive psychological consequences. So this isn't something that is like unique to Mormonism in any way. This is just what happens when a person uproots their belief in something transcendent.
The premise that leaving any transcendent belief system causes psychological distress is true. It is traumatic to uproot your entire worldview. However, this defense commits a logical fallacy by asserting that severity equals universality. The difficulty in leaving high-demand groups like the LDS Church is not just about losing belief in God. It is about losing institutionally enforced structures that prevent healthy disengagement. Leaving a standard Christian denomination may mean a person changes churches. Leaving the LDS Church often means a person loses their entire community. This is not universal. It is the result of deliberate institutional design. The LDS Church actively promotes a high-demand, high-density culture where social, recreational, and professional life often revolve entirely around the local ward. When a member leaves, they are not just leaving a church building, they are leaving their spouse's social circle, their children's youth activities, and their entire peer group. This weaponizes community against dissent, not to mention that official doctrine explicitly ties eternal salvation and familial reunion in the celestial kingdom to temple worthiness and active membership. Leaving the church is not just a personal choice, it is viewed as jeopardizing the family's eternal status. The term Mormon is not just a religious label, it is an exhaustive cultural and historical identity that for many goes all the way back to the founding of the church and the Mormon pioneers. Uprooting this identity creates a void far deeper than simply changing one's mind about theism.
I think he's being very honest in pointing out how horrifying this can be. Because the reality is I don't have a problem with people that think that they've found something better. You're going to have to tell me what that better thing is that you found outside of Jesus Christ, right? If you found something that you think is better than Christ and his gospel as the framework for your life, please come tell me, like send your missionaries. But that isn't usually what happens. Usually they leave and they just step out into this void. And it's sort of like, if you have a solid place to stand that maybe you're not sure of, you have reasons for doubt, but why would you just step out of it into the void? Like, why not stay where it's solid until you find somewhere more solid to sort of plant your feet?
Oh, Jacob, Jakey, Jake the snake. You made just one tiny little misstep in that response. You assumed that the original ground, the Mormon church, is solid. Leaving is not a proactive search, but a forced reaction. People who leave high-demand faiths like Mormonism rarely do so because they proactively found a better Jesus or a superior philosophical framework. They leave because they discover internal structural inconsistencies or ethical compromises that reveal the current foundation is not solid. For an honest critical thinker, solid ground is defined by verifiable integrity and consistency, not just by comfort. When an individual discovers major historical omissions, financial opacity, or institutional policies that lead to documented harm, the ground is no longer solid. It is revealed to be structurally compromised, maybe even quicksand. And I'm talking the kind of quicksand I learned about in the 80s that I was certain would have much more prevalence in my adult life. When the solid place is compromised, staying for comfort is an act of psychological and ethical negligence, whereas stepping into the frightening void becomes an act of integrity and self-preservation.
Our doctrine is essentially to say this, that the most important thing in time and in eternity are our relationships with other people. The idea is when we are right with God, when we have a right relationship with God, which is known as love, if we love God and we love our fellow man, that puts our relationships right with one another. But then we go a little bit further than that, and we say that family relationships are the most special and sacred relationships in life. And so the church places this emphasis on an order to our love, that we are to focus first and foremost on our love for God as we make ourselves right with Him, then with our wife or husband, then with our children, then with our greater extended family, to our community and nation, and on and on.
Doesn't Jacob make it sound so lovely and easy here? Yes, because while Jacob is being transparent about the doctrine's ideal, he is being logically opaque about the institutional mechanism used to enforce that ideal, which is the source of the trauma. He describes the beautiful relationship goal without mentioning the explicit, mandatory, and perpetually enforced terms and conditions required to achieve it. The doctrine of eternal family is not an unconditional blessing. It is a conditional contract predicated entirely on the member's behavior and worthiness as determined by the organization. Love for God is institutionally defined by obedience to the commandments, which includes paying tithing, following the word of wisdom, and maintaining temple recommend worthiness through private interviews with a local leader. Because the promise of eternal family is contingent on continuous worthiness, the church effectively weaponizes the most sacred relationship, that between parent and child or husband and wife, as the ultimate tool for doctrinal and behavioral compliance.
I want to stop this for a second, because one of the things that I think is a misnomer about our theology that very commonly gets thrown out there is that our families, we can't quote unquote be with them. Like, what does that even mean, to be with your family together? Do we think there's like electric fences and like, oh, you guys are on this side, you're on that side, and you can't get over the fence or something? The reality is, if you actually look at the scriptures, and I think a proper understanding of our theology is that what it's talking about is the nature of our relationships with one another. We can be celestial and have celestial relationships, but we can't have celestial level relationships with other people unless we are indeed celestial ourselves. Whether we can actually, visit our family or something in some weird sort of celestial place with fences and weird things. No, it's the quality of the type of relationship that you can have. And every one of us know this. The reality is that I do worry because this happens. There's something in my relationship with those who don't kind of have the same goals as me fundamentally, that aren't heading towards the same direction, that our relationship can't be as deep as it would be if we both had the same vision of what our life was and what is ultimately most important. That doesn't mean you can't have great relationship. I have great relationships with people who aren't members of the church, including in my own family. Wonderful relationships. But could they be higher? Could they be better if we both shared a faith in Jesus Christ? If we both had the same goal that we thought life was ultimately oriented towards? Of course. Like, that would mean we are fundamentally playing the same game. What he's talking about, there are relationship issues that are caused, but those are the natural consequence of when people no longer have the same lens that they're looking through the world through. Christ didn't want people to have just good relationships. He wanted them to be one as he and the Father are one.
He really went for it on this one. I'll admit this is a more sophisticated and harder to deconstruct argument. He is correct that Mormon doctrine on eternal families is not literally about physical barriers. It is about the potential for relationship growth. However, his conclusion that a relationship can't be as deep unless both individuals share the same monolithic faith and goals is the precise source of post-Mormon relational trauma. This is a subtle yet profound logical fallacy. While differing worldviews certainly create friction, the deepest relationships are often defined by the capacity to love and respect fundamental difference. By teaching that familial love is somehow incomplete or less valuable than a relationship based on doctrinal uniformity, the LDS doctrine mandates that the faithful member must perpetually view their non-believing loved one as deficient. This is not a natural consequence of differing lenses. It is an institutionally enforced emotional constraint that places the church's conditional requirements about the unconditional nature of familial love.
And here's the thing, if we're all just full of crap and this whole thing is fake, well then, yeah, maybe there is a better game to go and play.
Jakeathon. I think you should stay curious about that part.
Just think about what happens when a really liberal, woke kind of family, their son goes out and votes for Donald Trump and suddenly is like a big-time Trump supporter. Are you going to act like that doesn't have an impact on their family?
The analogy to political splits is powerful because it correctly identifies the pain of diverging worldviews. However, it fails due to using a false equivalence. When a son votes differently, the disagreement is based on policy and values, and while painful, the family has no institutional power to formally exclude him from key life events or threaten his eternal existence. Leaving the church, by contrast, activates institutional sanctions like being barred from a temple ceiling and creates a theological mandate for the believer to fear their loved one's eternal fate.
Again, this isn't about Mormonism per se. It's just what happens when there's major ideological shifts in worldview and how that affects relationships between individuals. And to be totally honest, like a lot of Latter-day Saints, their way of dealing with it is way better than crazy woke people or radical Islamists.
It's about a high-demand structure that weaponizes eternal family to enforce compliance and uses private worthiness interviews to manage sensitive information. Furthermore, justifying these institutional practices by claiming they are better than radical Islamists or crazy woke people is a low-bar defense. The only logical measure of an institution's ethical health is whether it meets the highest standards of transparency, financial accountability, and psychological safety for all of its members, regardless of how solid its theology feels to those who remain. We will get back to Jacob's response some more tomorrow. Now let's move to the Moroni channel. I have featured material from them a handful of times, and this last week they did something quite curious, and I am realizing that it may not be the first time they've done this. On their website, the Moroni channel claims to be an independent religious media owned and operated by the Moroni Group, a multinational nonprofit organization that publishes a selection of news, lifestyle, and entertainment. On Facebook recently, they posted 2 separate images of the same alleged event. The first one has a fairly blurry picture of what appears to be 2 male LDS missionaries standing by a downed tree in the rain. The elders themselves don't appear to be wet from the rain or have any dirt on their white shirts. The description says, in a viral video, residents captured 2 Christian missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints braving heavy rain to clear a fallen tree blocking a local road. Despite the storm's intensity, the young missionaries worked together to make the path passable again, drawing admiration from nearby residents. Locals praised their selfless act as a true display of Christ-like service and community spirit. And it has a link and says, for updates, visit moronichannel.org. The second post, posted 6 minutes later, has a very blurry picture of 2 young men standing outside in the dark, their path lit by the headlights of a vehicle. One of the men seems to be holding a smallish tree branch. The caption says, Christian missionaries win hearts with Christ-like act in heavy rain. I was curious to learn more, especially about the viral video, so I clicked the link and it took me to the Moroni channel website, where there was absolutely no mention of the elders, the storm, or the alleged viral video. This This is not the first time I've seen Moroni channel reference a viral video without providing any context or proof that said viral video even exists. I am starting to wonder what the Moroni channel is really about. Next, let's go to Matthew Watkins on Facebook. He said, "Were we better off before the changes? Maybe, but I still support the changes. Over the past few years, the church has pared away many programs and practices that formed our worship, our culture, and our community." Then he has the following list. The Mormon moniker, Relief Society / Priesthood Conference sessions, the 3-hour Sunday block, many specific standards and policies in the For Strength of Youth and the Handbook, home teaching, scouting / duty to God / personal progress, separate elders quorum and high priest groups, father and sons campouts in most wards, door knocking and street contacting in many missions, missionary letters and emails replaced by weekly calls home, gospel principles class, young men presidencies, stake athletics, roadshows, dance festivals, etc., priesthood executive council, correlated elders quorum relief society lesson schedules, missionary splits, and personal priesthood interviews. Okay. The doctrine of continuous revelation mandates that the church's foundation is a living prophet, right? This requires the membership to maintain extreme cultural plasticity, aka the ability to discard deeply cherished practices the moment the current living prophet declares them irrelevant, or a victory for Satan. And Watkins' statement, "Maybe, but I still support the changes," is the quintessential expression of institutional obedience. It means my personal comfort, sentimental attachment, or even my opinion on the efficiency of the old system is irrelevant when juxtaposed with the directive from authority. My support is for the office, not necessarily the policy. Watkins' list is less a description of evolving programs and more a blueprint for how a high-demand, high-unity organization ensures total compliance by regularly demanding the sacrifice of cultural artifacts as proof that obedience to the living word takes precedence over loyalty to the past. Next, we will go to the Washington Post for an article by Monica Hess. She is a screens critic for the style section. Previously, she was an opinion columnist who frequently wrote about gender and its impact on society. In 2022, she was a Pulitzer Prize finalist in the field of commentary. She's the author of several novels, most recently, They Went Left. She starts her article this way. In 1827, a farm boy from rural New York named Joseph Smith claimed to have dug up some golden plates inscribed with an ancient text, which he then translated into English, which he then published as a tome called the Book of Mormon, which then became a religion, and 2 centuries passed. And because of all this, we may now listen to a group of beachy-waved ding-dongs on television explain that their faith prohibits them from drinking alcohol, which is why they instead do ketamine. It's time to talk about the 3rd season of The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which is to say, let's chat about America. Personally, I have watched the entire season, and without spoilers, hopefully, unless I give a warning, I will interject some of my thoughts about it as well. Back to the article. Who is Mom Talk? They are Mormon TikTok stars, and that is apparently all I can say because one of the official documents I signed stipulated that I could not reveal who is back in Mom Talk and the new leader. Luckily, I cannot keep most of them straight anyway, but their names are all something like Bonnet, Mackensla, Christmas, and Bree. In this season, Bonnet, Chastely, Moronica, and Bree all contemplate the statuses of their marriages to the men of, yes, Dad Talk. They all talk about how family is the most important thing while appearing to spend most of their time trying to get away from their families via an endless treadmill of girls' retreats. You have never seen so much organza worn by women over legal voting age. You have never experienced so many incidents of adults needing to clear up the drama. Bonnet, Organza, Citronella, and Bree are always needing to clear up the drama, and then plan more parties so that more drama can blork itself onto the screen. The last time I remember having even near the drama in my life that the Secret Lives wives have in theirs was when all of my friends were Mormon. Back to the article. I asked to write about Mormon wives because this is a show where it is not only possible, but practically mandatory to be both slutty and pregnant, where taking the Lord's name in vain is seen as problematic, but slander, lying, and underhandedness are not, where the stars say things like, "All my prayers have been answered and the church is true," but they are usually praying for fame and money rather than say, Gaza. She's hitting on something that the show made me think about. The LDS Church places immense doctrinal emphasis on modesty, sexual purity, and the sacredness of conception within marriage. But the observed culture displayed on the show is both sexually suggestive and focused on high fertility, exposing a dramatic tension between the church's strict public morality and a highly sexualized material reality. The perceived ethical mandates of the church culture have become being fruitful, wealthy, and attractive, overriding the stated ethical mandates of modesty and spiritual focus, creating a morality defined by external appearance rather than internal principle. The article goes on to say, better than almost anything I've seen, this show illustrates the strange political and cultural era that our country has found itself in. The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives is the perfect prosperity gospel purity culture project 2025 distillation of femininity in the current bull market era of evangelical America. To understand what we're talking about, we first need to place The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives in its proper place in the reality television universe. On one end of the spectrum, you have the Real Housewives franchise, in which rich women delight in spending audaciously, dressing skimpily, and behaving badly. At the other end of the spectrum, you have Welcome to Plathville or Sister Wives, in which modest women share how their faith encourages them to cover their shoulders, submit to traditional gender roles, and birth families the size of platoons. The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives takes the spectrum, bends it, and hog-ties it into a bow. These are modest women who behave badly and dress skimpily, but also submit to traditional gender roles and repeatedly announce their devotion to their faith. I would say some of them do. If I had to guess, I think that most, if not all of them, are either completely out of the church or on their way out. Spoiler, I did not see one garment-friendly outfit the entire show. Back to the article. Their piousness is the show's entire hook, but in this world, declarations of faith are divorced thoroughly from acts of goodness. Whereas the Plathville crew might argue that religious devotion should impact real-world behavior, the Mormon wives see no issue with talking about temple recommends, the past that deems them in good standing with the church, while concurrently eavesdropping on one another's phone calls. I do not know if any of them hold a current temple recommend, but they do in fact seem to have no problems with treating each other really poorly. Back to the article. The women of Mom Talk have learned that paying lip service to female independence is the right branding and business move, while meanwhile planting themselves firmly under the male gaze. You'll notice that empowerment in this world always looks like wearing sexy clothes and keeping their bodies toned and tanned for their husbands or prospective suitors. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that, of course, but it's noteworthy that in this show, nobody is finding empowerment via taking an accounting course or reading The Feminine Mystique. And this was one of my main takeaways. I'll elaborate in a little bit. It's Girls Gone Wild meets The Surrendered Wife. It's the veneer of piety over a foundation of mold. It's a worldview based on the concept that women are allowed to be a lot of things so long as those things involve pursuing heterosexual marriage, having babies, and looking hot. It's not uncommon for women in these types of roles to use their positions of power to argue that women shouldn't have positions of power, as in Mormon Wives Season 1, during which one star admits she is the breadwinner of her family. I think they're talking about Jen, if I remember correctly, but also accepts that she has to take a back seat in an important baby blessing ceremony because only men can hold the priesthood. Personally, scenes like that were hard to watch for me. The show's dynamic serves as a stark televised demonstration of the ethical tension. Mormon women are given the cultural permission to achieve great material success if they are young and hot, but the institution retains the power to revoke their authority and reduce them to a supporting role whenever a sacred covenant or ceremony is performed. Back to the article. Someone once told me that the Mormon faith was the last religion it was socially acceptable to mock, and that might be true. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have certainly made bank from doing so, but part of the reason is because because the faith's growing pains have been so visible, happening so publicly and so recently through many of our lifetimes. And I think she nails this next part. After more than a century of prohibiting hot drinks, widely understood to refer to all caffeinated beverages, the church announced in 2012 that actually, it turns out, sodas are fine. For generations, practicing Mormons had been told that their garments, the sacred vestments worn under clothing, were doctrinally required to cover shoulders. This year, the church announced that a sleeveless version would now be available. Some women found that liberating and some found it hurtful. For years, they had been slut-shamed if they wore shoulder-bearing tops. Several women told The Cut, but now they were suddenly informed it was fine because some elderly men said so. Is it validating to anyone else to hear an outsider frame the changes this way? Back to the article. I feel like we're really starting to lose sight of what mom talk is, Bonnet complains to Keltinia, Tractor, Dolphin Noises, and Bree. I beg to differ. If mom talk was, all along, a crass money-making scheme perpetuated by unfulfilled wives whose culture did not want them to seek traditional employment outside of the home, fear not, Bonnet. Your vision is still 2020. But if what she means is that she's not actually sure what she's supposed to be doing anymore, well, that makes total sense. More than one character shares that she is now working on herself, attending therapy, trying to attain a more peaceful life. But their shared vocation, mom talk, now relies on conflict and scroll-worthy shenanigans. Their husbands are supportive of their careers, at least they're supportive of the income it generates, but at the same time talk about how having their private lives shared on television feels emasculating. Word to the wise, don't do a drinking game with the word emasculating during season 3. If this were the tightrope I was expected to walk, I wouldn't know what to do either. I truly wouldn't. The most I could think of to do is to lean in close, hold her hand and whisper comfortingly, "Don't worry, you can be slutty and pregnant. You can have it all." Now that I've finished season 3, I will absolutely be listening to Exmo commentary on it. For now, I will say I came away from it with 2 very distinct emotions: sadness and insignificance. Sadness because of the scenes where the women take abuse from the men in their lives and somehow find ways to blame themselves for it. And insignificance because watching pretty Mormons flaunt their wealth and success reminds me a lot of what it felt like going to church every week for 37 years and being the poor one who the pretty people pitied but mostly ignored. And last up today, let's go to this quote that I will change just a little. I look forward to the day when adults and children who were forced to end contact with their abusive churches are met with the compassion and support they need, not the criticism and judgment their churches deserve. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.